Fáill How to Be Irish, a podcast which explores Irishness through my guests' interests and areas of expertise. I'm your host, Una Harty. If you're not hungry right now, you'll be hungry after listening to this episode with the wonderful Sian Conway. You may know Sian from her food writing and content creation work. Sian Conway is a Dublin-born, self-confessed jack of a lot of trades, a master of none, yet. And she's very okay with that. A neurodivergent food clown, writer / content creator with an insatiable curiosity and like it or loathed pep, her quote-unquote work is firmly rooted in a bubbling pot of food, Irishness and pop culture. Having actually been very online since the age of 11, Sian has spent years in the service industry, working independently as a visual artist and amateur writer, until eventually finding a loyal virtual audience in the Irish food scene at Char Food Guide, an Irish online food publication. A year and a half later, not only did she win the Best Instagram / TikTok at the Irish Food Writing Awards 2023 on behalf of Char, and have a piece published in the Irish indie food magazine Guzzle, but Sian has gone on to explore the big, bad and beautiful world of freelancer life. You can find her on TikTok mostly, and soon returning to YouTube, where her upcoming series, Meet Your Maker, will be hosted. A céad míle fáilte to you, Sian. Thank you so much for coming into the How to Be Irish studio today.
Oh, Garmila, Una, I'm so excited to be here. Also, it's so funny to listen to someone read out a bio that you've written for yourself.
I can only imagine. I mean, I haven't been in your position yet, so I'd say you're just kind of sitting there like, oh, did I write that?
Yeah, truly, because it's like that thing of, I was saying to you when I was sending it over, it's just so hard to not just disparagingly talk about yourself or talk about yourself with the pseudo kind of oh lol, whatever. And so when you actually write something that's I guess a fair but nice representation of what you do, you're just like
Yeah, I think it's the Irishness in us. And I actually wanted to ask you about this. So you're a content creator, you put yourself out there online all the time. How do you juggle that with being Irish at the same time and all that kind of Catholic guilt?
I think that is such a very hard-hitting and perfect question to start in on, straight in, no kissing.
Yeah.
I do think that what I always say whenever I started doing it, when I realized kind of how I did it as someone who's always been very self-conscious and had a lot of issues with how I look and all this kind of stuff, we all kind of are, and also the Catholic guilt of it all and the kind of base level of shame that we all have. I think there is a part of disassociation to it. And I mean that with total seriousness, where you just kind of have to switch something off in your brain, because otherwise the self-consciousness will creep in and it just destroys everything. And maybe actually after my whole life of trying to figure out what is confidence, maybe that's what it is. It's just a slight delusion to kind of distract from. Because if you're out, I remember the first few times doing videos with Char, and we'd be out and it was terrifying because I didn't know that, I didn't sign up to be a presenter. It just kind of happened. And then so we were kind of pushed out in the street one day, and granted I had two of my coworkers who were also kind of jumping around and screaming with me in the middle of Dublin City, and you're one eye is looking at them, the other eye is being 17 people that looking back, and you just kind of have to be you could fall into the pit of being oh God, what are they going to think? What are they going to think? What are they going to think? And on the other hand, you're okay, well, I have to get these lines out. Otherwise, we're going to be here longer. It's all in the mental, but also, yet, you're taking yourself out of the mental, if that makes sense. Because one thing, I know that I don't want to derail so quickly on in the conversation, but one thing that I kind of hate that Irish people love to talk about or joke about or whatever is the concept of notions. And I think that when you're out filming, it can be so easy, or posting online or doing anything like what you do, putting yourself out there in any kind of way, whether it's writing, whether it's creativity, any kind of thing that involves, I guess, a piece of you goes into it. There's always just, I don't know, I always have this fear that someone's going to be oh yeah, notions. I also have to be who cares, and have to take myself out of that, because it also distracts you from the actual work as well. If you're too busy worrying about how you are perceived or how other people are perceiving you or what other people might think, to get out of that kind of head down, internalized shame kind of thing.
Yeah, 100% agree with you. Yeah, I find so obviously I've been doing this podcast now for a short while, and I've been doing a few bits on TikTok and stuff like that. But I've always wanted to put myself out more in that space. And I found that it took me leaving Ireland to find the confidence to do that.
Yeah.
Because like you said, you'd be there and you kind of have one eye on who do I know around me and who's seeing me and thinking, Jesus, she's very big for her boots, isn't she?
100%. And I've heard that same thing about leaving Ireland. Heard people talk about it even with how they express themselves with like fashion or getting into this mindset of being able to do stuff that they've always wanted to do. And I find it's not the same thing because I've never lived for a long time outside of Ireland, but I found that with TikTok for ages that I found it easy to put stuff on that platform because not that many people I knew were on it, not that many friends and not that many family members and not that many people that I knew. Like Instagram, I think is a bit more kind of like everyone you know. It's like what Facebook used to be. So I'd never post, my own stuff on Facebook. And now I'm kind of finding that way with Instagram where it's just like, not that I'm like, don't look at me, but a little bit kind of like, don't look at me, while also what I do is very much look at me,
100%. And I think TikTok has been a great platform because I don't know, it's kind of like anonymized. I don't know how to describe what it is, but what you said is like, oh, I actually have no idea who I'm talking to here.
Yeah, it's really not pushing you, or I think you as a creator or as a content consumer or viewer. It's not really kind of going so deep into the analytics and the who's watching, like which I think is maybe a bit of a millennial hang up from like the days of Facebook where we'd love to see who is viewing our profile, or with Instagram where it really wants to show you who is the first one to look at your stories, your Instagram stories or whatever. And I think it's so nice and freeing, I think, in a way with TikTok where it's like, yeah, like you could be scrolling and see, oh, here's a video from Una Harty asking this question about a specifically Irish thing. Oh, I might know her, I might not know her, but like, ding, like it, watch the video, done. It seems less committal and there's eyes on you, if that makes sense.
There's less gravity or something to giving that little like on TikTok.
TikTok does in its openness to everything, whereas Instagram is a little more, maybe more kind of career / familial / people. TikTok seems like anyone can kind of come in and out and enjoy and dip out and dip back in, and I kind of like that about it. And people can come in for discussion, which I love, which is not really a thing as much on Instagram. I think that's an aspect of it that I like, when there's also so many things that, are shit about it. But
yeah.
Oh, sorry, am I allowed to swear?
Yeah, of course.
Okay, sorry.
This is a podcast about Irishness. I think swearing is going to be a necessity. I find that with TikTok has connected me with like some of the most amazing people. A lot of my guests that I have from this podcast are from TikTok, people who are really interested in something really niche and they just love it and that passion comes through.
Another thing I love about TikTok is how every niche, every kind of interest can have its corner, and you could have no interest in like geology, and then you'll find like this person who's going around rivers in Canada and they're finding rocks and cracking into them to see if they can find the imprints of fossils in them. And I just think that's so amazing and cool. And I've learned so much very surface level stuff about things that I never thought that I would know about. Kind of like when you're a kid and you have one of those massive books about, I used to have loads about like stones and stuff like that. What are they called? Encyclopedias. And you're just like, wow, I'm going to go from learning about like mummified bodies to delta rivers or something.
TikTok like unleashes my inner child. It's those things that I was interested in before the internet existed, that you used to go, do you remember the primary school? They'd drag you into the library on the Wednesday afternoon or something, and you'd just be like, right, I've got to kill 2 hours here, and sure, I'll take it because I don't want to be back learning maths in the classroom. So you're like, right, I'll find this massive encyclopedia, I'll open it up and I'll learn every single breed of horse that there is.
I do really miss that. We were a Friday library gang, but it was so nice to just like sit and be enveloped by that and not have this little world in your back pocket that you just can't detach from, in like, which I say in like a good way and a bad way. I always like to, there's so many things about social media and TikTok especially, because obviously it's kind of like the newest one and the most prevalent one that I use. But there's so many good things versus like the bad things. And I don't just want to be like, this thing is terrible and toxic and poisonous. And it's like, yes, in ways, but also there is that really nice thing of learning or seeing different perspectives or discussion and conversation, which I think, and also information sharing, which I think is a decolonized sharing of information across the board, which I just think is quite unique for a platform so big.
What do you mean by a decolonization of information?
I don't know if that's the right word for it. I feel like it's just like free information, something that you don't have to sign up for. It's someone being like, oh, here's how to like cheaply fix a thing in your sink that you would otherwise need to pay a load of money to either get a new I don't know, a new piece or a plumber or something like that. I see a lot of that on there, but they're just sharing this information with other people, which I think is really class. And maybe in a world that is constantly being described as getting less and less connected, it's like these things that people sharing with others, what they have, knowledge, food, ideas, all that stuff. I just think that's really heartwarming.
It is, yeah. I agree with you. It's nice to come across these things that you would maybe have to go looking for otherwise, but you wouldn't think to go, oh, is this really how I should clean my washing machine? You know?
Oh yeah, it's the cleaning TikTok people. They, like, if I had any money, I would be giving them some every month because they just keep coming out with bangers. Like
They
they
really
really
do.
do.
I absolutely love a bit of cleaning talk. Like a Sunday reset is stunning.
Wish I could be as dedicated as they are. I get so inspired when I see them getting all that water and hoofing all the dirt out of the carpet.
You do a lot of commentary on Irish culture and current affairs. How do you find that is being perceived at the moment? Do you have any thoughts on that?
I do have thoughts on that, and I'm sure you've probably seen the last couple of videos that I posted that people have thoughts about that.
Yes.
First of all, I'm not a Richard Chambers, I'm not a Anne Doyle. I did study journalism in school, but I'm not so deeply knowledgeable about how anything works.
Mhm.
I'm always the first person to say that. Always learning. But I think you can still talk about things. And politically, there's a lot that's happening in the country and has been for a very long time. And maybe because also with the US election and with the way that politics is going in the world, especially like everything moving back towards more right leaning politics and ideals, and like we're seeing the landslide move back to traditional conservative ideals across the West. It's hard to not give a shit and not want to talk about it in some sense, because I also feel like, not that I have a massive platform, but it for me it's very important. Like I like started to forge an interest in kind of like politics maybe around 16, 17 by my wonderful secondary school history teacher, Mr. Campion, who really radicalized us all. When I talk sometimes about things like, say, the general election, and I'm very left leaning in my values and my ideals and what I would like for this country. And I know that that isn't to like it. Politics isn't black and white and it's very complicated, but from my experience and learned about the country's political history and background with the same two parties that it has been batting back and forth since the foundation of the state, and seeing the impact of that even over my lifetime, it makes me furious that we have not seen any change. And so making videos kind of, I think everything I do, there's a tone of like slight facetiousness. Like if I'm saying, hey, don't fucking go out and vote for Fianna Fáil, Fine Gael or Aontú or the racist independents. I think maybe if I wasn't a woman, and this is the bombastic thing that I was probably going to say, which also maybe people might not like when they hear this. I do think that if I was not a woman and was in fact a man, people would be less angry with me for making videos like this on my own TikTok. And also maybe, yeah, if I was still a woman, but maybe not a white woman, I would probably get even more hate. I know there's always a case of echo chamber-ness, especially with Irish stuff. And I've known that from being on Twitter for years. Like echo chambers obviously exist. And, I'm not going to be following right-leaning content creators or anything like that. What I usually post would be kind of more lighthearted, kind of tongue-in-cheek toned or food-based things. But it's all hand in hand, really. Everything informs everything else.
That's culture, isn't it? It's going to be impacted by current affairs. It then impacts onto all the different aspects of culture, such as food and fashion and sport and language. We'll delve into food a little bit later on because I know that's your speciality. I wanted to ask you about being freelance in Ireland as a content creator, because you've recently switched. I wanted to find out how that has been for you, and if you feel like there's anything unique about the Irish scene at all.
Yeah, it's been now, 6 months, which honestly kind of has flown, but also hasn't. I've never really worked a job that hasn't been you get your paycheck either like every week, 2 weeks, or a month. And I think I've always had, like a lot of people do, a fear of not having money. Even when I've been broke as shit on minimum wage, or like I've never been making bank. You know what I mean? I think there's, I don't know if it's like a generational hang up or something, but it's the idea to go freelance was kind of maybe tied into like kind of earning more self-confidence about what I do, which has definitely been not hard earned or hard digested, but it's definitely taken a while. And going back to what we were talking about earlier, the notions thing, being like, oh, she really thinks well of herself, doesn't she? Thinks that she's owed the world or whatever, which is kind of what a lot of my DMs are saying at the minute after those political videos. But I just felt it was right, having worked for an online food publication, and being like, maybe it would be more beneficial to just do this on my own terms and do this with me as the boss. And it was scary. And I had gone freelance at the same time as my coworker at said publication. She was the editorial person. We both decided it was time to go, do our own thing, spread the wings. And it has been very interesting, very fun. I would say successful. And have gotten to do some very interesting different things with different people, like in the first couple of weeks alone, getting to work with like Kerrygold and Ballymaloe and doing a job up for the Regional Cultural Centre in Donegal, which was fantastic to just, there was a lot of people who were like, hey, let's snap you up. We want to do something with you, which was amazing. And I was very grateful, and people really trying to be like, here, where can we fit you in? And then a couple of months later, I think it was, which is something I knew and a lot of my freelance friends had prepped me for. People have been pretty well established in their respective fields for years, had been like, girly, the invoice thing is hell. Una, can we just like take a minute just to like have a collective groan and eye roll over the state of invoices? Between August and September, I was still doing jobs and I still had things coming in, and I was really starting to own my own stuff in terms of my own online content, which I know I don't make any money from. I was feeling good about that, and I was enjoying doing what I was doing because I was like, this is what I really enjoy doing. But it really impacted, I think, my self-esteem those 2.5 months. I was really like, I'm doing the work. I know that this was the right decision to go freelance. I was like, if I have to get a part-time job in a restaurant or something, I don't mind. I really don't care because I love hospitality. But I knew in the back of my mind, some people will see that as like having failed, if you get me.
Yeah.
Which I also like, I don't agree with. And I know that's also just the thing of being like too concerned with what other people think, because working in service is not a failure at any stage of your life ever. I was like, am I doing the right thing? Knowing in my brain and in my gut that I was like, I just need to see this out. And then it all kind of started to slot back into place, and just rolling with the tides and the punches. And like, I've never been great with money, just a bit impulsive, of ADHD, so it's just never being very good at managing money. Not that I'm going out and buying Cartier fucking watches or anything, but you know what I mean, just like never being good at the planning and the logistical side of money. So with freelance, it's definitely been like a learning curve.
I want to talk to you about food now, which is, of course, your passion and what a lot of people know you for. I've been wanting to cover food on this podcast for the last while because not only do I love to eat, I would say I'm a foodie, even though people hate that term. I'm just going to claim it and use it because I'm
Yes.
like, I don't care what you think. I am a foodie, okay? I am one. And I know you are one too. First of all, though, I want to ask you about your Meet Your Maker series, which I believe you are launching on YouTube soon. What was the inspiration for that?
I basically soft launched the series on TikTok, which I know you've seen that video. This is an idea that I had back at the very start of this year, of 2024. I was still in Char. I was going to be in Char for another couple of months, and I had this soft baked idea. I was around that point. I was starting to make kind of longer TikTok videos for Char. It was kind of like, oh well, no one's going to watch, a 5-10 minute video, and actually, they did. I know you're supposed to feed the algorithm with what it wants, but I really don't like doing that. I don't care. So I just personally prefer longer content. One, because as you have already seen now, since we've been recording, I am not succinct at all. I always got a tangent and whatever. And even personally, I do just prefer longer form content because I just think you can kind of delve into things a bit more. Anyway, I was like kind of ruminating on that. I want to do a series. I want to go around and talk to the mad heads on this island doing mad bits. And what I meant was like in food and drink, because over the last couple of years, just becoming aware of how much incredible, insane creators there are in food and drink. Like, even from just like the sheer amount of whiskey and alcohol producers on the island to like cheesemakers who are just doing insane shit because they don't have to be regulated by the rules of French cheese or Italian cheese. They can just literally do whatever they want and make mad stuff. And there was so many producers that I'd kind of known through looking after the Char socials and whatever, and being like, oh, I would love to know everything about what they do, why they do it, and how they do it. So around that time I was like, okay, cool, thinking of a name. I was like, Meet Your Maker. At first I was thinking it'd be kind of gas if I was dressed as Grim Reaper and talking to these people, but then I was like, maybe it's a bit of a stretch. There's a videographer who I kind of know from friends. He does a lot of music videos. He's very talented. His name's Tim Sherwood. And we had a few chats and I was like, do you want to do this with me? For some reason, I wanted my first guest on this thing to be a specific cheesemaker in Belfast, who was in that little video I posted the other day on TikTok, a little sneak peek. But his name's Michael Thompson, and he is Northern Ireland's first raw milk cheese producer. And he has a cheese shop called Mike's Fancy Cheese in Belfast. Finally, myself, my boyfriend and Tim, we went up to him to Belfast to shoot the first episode. So we invaded this lovely freezing cold cheese shop for a couple of hours and chatted away. And you know when you have a gut feeling about something, but it's like, oh yeah, this could do well. But more importantly, it's feeding the need in me to want to do something like this in creative spheres, about flow or about being in tune with what it is that really sets you alight or is your kind of raison d'etre. You can all decide for yourself when the first episode airs, but he did send me a little clip of the intro we'd filmed and he'd edited it, and I got really emotional, and it just feels different to anything I've seen, but it feels true to me, and that's kind of what I want. Not that I'm trying to be different from other people, but I think it's a real departure from the shit that I'm tired of seeing. Macho, aggressive men being like, is this the dirtiest, fucking filthiest, disgustingest burger in Ireland? I'm sick of it. And it's not that, it's also not, I'm also trying to say that like women can't also engage in that, but they're also, I feel like women aren't really given the same space to enjoy doing that either. So there's kind of like that whole chestnut. Sometimes you pick up a product, like you might go to a place and find this lovely artisanal Irish product and be like, wow, this is really nice and really tasty and I like this a lot, but you don't really know anything about what got it to that shelf or about the person who made it. It's a big conversation across the globe about where our food comes from and having more of a relationship with being able to source where that comes from. Stories behind the stuff we eat too, and why someone in Wicklow decided to make wines made out of raspberries, you know.
The stories behind the food, people love that. I know that there are a few creators in the US and in the UK who do similar-ish stuff, but I really don't feel like it's been done in Ireland, where it's that real... And Ireland has so much to offer. I mean, it's been said 1,000 times. Incredible dairy, incredible meat products, and to have that showcased in a long form would be fantastic. And I'm so excited to see it, and especially to have your personality on it as well.
If one person watches it, enjoy it, and a few people watch it and enjoy it and get to discover a new person, that's worth putting, what we were talking about at the beginning, putting yourself out, because maybe above it all, above what people might think of you, it's something that you really want to do and believe in.
So when is the first episode coming out?
So hopefully in the next week or two, it could be up and ready.
Brilliant. Well, we'll keep our eyes peeled. I'll be sure to share it and all that kind of stuff.
Thank you.
August, in terms of the Irish food culture more generally, you've been writing about it, creating content on it for the last while. How do you think it has developed in recent years, and what makes it unique?
I don't know. Maybe is it the smallness of the country and how well connected everyone is to one another. There's a really lovely thing, speaking of even just hospitality at the minute, it's going through a really, really, really tough time in terms of costs and everything, and we're seeing this landslide of closures. Well-loved places, almost even kind of like legacy places, closing at a rate that maybe the country hasn't seen since the last recession, or even maybe before that. I've always noticed there's this lovely inherent need among business owners to look out for one another and across food to kind of like cross-reference one another. I don't necessarily feel that there's like a massive sense of individualism among restaurant owners, restaurant workers, growers, producers, farmers. Not always. Maybe that is a slightly naive way of looking at it, but from my own experience, it does seem like, it feels like a hub. Maybe again because the country is so small, but like the food industry across the board it's this beautiful place that I have felt very fortunate to be able to even kind of be a small drop in its vast ocean, you know, over the last little while. I was saying before, like, or to someone before recently, I used to, in my early 20s, did a lot of like amateur writing and like visual art and photography, and I still never felt like I had friends in artistic circles in Dublin and whatever, but I never really felt like I kind of belonged. I never felt like there was this massive kind of warmth or belonging. And maybe there are people who are more established in their respective creative fields who feel differently, but I know for myself, like, I just never really felt like it was my space or that I was good enough to be part of it. But with food, not even as a producer or a guild writer or anything, I'm pretty fucking small fry and fresh off the block in terms of things. But I've just never been so welcomed and looked after, and it's just a really friendly and warm place, I think. I'm obviously like, when you travel or when you think about the world, there's so many different cuisines and so many different restaurants and so many different things, but I don't even know how I'm ever gonna get a chance to get around to even get involved with what's going on out there when there's so much here that I still feel like I've barely cracked the surface of what this country has to offer and what it's continuing to do. Like the sheer, what's the word I'm trying to think of now, innovation of people within the food sphere of Ireland, and again across the board from agriculture to restaurants to producers, is just insane. Like, people are just doing mad stuff. And I remember after the last recession around 2011 is when we started to see this out of the cracks of the austere earth. We're seeing like this new generation of like food businesses in Dublin anyway, and I think like across the country too, of people who are making something beautiful outside of this small, narrow, restricted space left by the recession. And a lot of those, unfortunately, have either closed or have had to like kind of reinvent themselves. And we're seeing it even more so now with like chefs and people who are oyster farmers and sellers. And I just think it's phenomenal.
I do think that is exactly what you said, is like, through the kind of cracks of the austerity, with limitation comes creativity.
Yeah.
You have to be creative. And I think this absolutely wonderful, vibrant food scene in Ireland was born. I think we looked around and we said, Jesus Christ, we've got some unreal ingredients here, lads. Let's get creative with it. And it's just blossomed from there on out.
I agree, because I think if we think about maybe the previous recession of the 80s, maybe for a long time food was also a class thing as well. It's like we had the likes, we might have had like Patrick Ebos or whatever in Dublin, but food more wasn't really so much celebrated. I think it was either a thing that you are struggling to get or a thing that like you're kind of maybe abundant in, but maybe have lost the relationship between where your food's coming from. It might not necessarily been the same as somewhere like New York, which is, people always say, is like a destination for food or whatever, and people are going to get pizzas or they're going to restaurants, or, you know, London obviously has a sprawling food scene, from like the foods that people like immigrants have brought in to Michelin restaurants and like very, very like classy, well-regarded places across the world. And now we're seeing Ireland as a tourist destination for food, and seeing things like, I don't know, like fucking Irish dishes like coddle getting bracing pages of massive publications, and people being like, oh yeah, we're going to write about like this kind of thing, is so mad. And it's also seeing that it's not just Dublin, because it isn't ever just Dublin that's doing phenomenal stuff. Like, I love I remember this year watching the this is like the nerdiest thing I've ever said, watching the live stream for the Michelin star announcements for the UK and Ireland, and Jesus Christ, they were fucking slow to start. I was on that. I remember I was cooking dinner, and I was like, come on, and seeing like stars going to Homestead Cottage in Clare, and it's so nice to see that, and it's so nice to see people kind of like standing up and paying attention and recognizing that, yeah, like this is an island effort. This isn't just an isolated pocket of food places. Because every time we get to go, like my boyfriend's from Donegal, so whenever we're going up, it's like, okay, will we stop at this place? Like this new bakery that's opened up in Fermanagh, and he's a baker, and I was like, did you hear about this place? I saw the Gastrogades posted about it, and he was like, no. And he was like, well, we'll go up there the next time, even if we have to drive the long way through Donegal, we'll do it. I just think it's great. It seems like, even though it's very tough on one hand, it does also seem like there's this kind of fertile soil for innovation, creation, and like just doing class tasty bits.
And I think to tie back into the social media thing, that has been used to highlight these amazing places that you wouldn't have heard of beforehand. Like, it makes me very excited to travel and explore more of my country through food.
Isn't that like just the nicest thing about it, is just like, oh yeah, amazing. Why would I need to go anywhere else?
I'm back in Dublin for like 10 days in January, and I'm like, oh my God, these places better be scary, because I'm coming. These have been on my list for now.
Hate to see Una coming. You deserve to just go in and cause some damage.
I'm actually so scared for the price of Dublin coffee though. Like, it actually, I think last time I was there in September, I got this Americano. I think it was $4.50. I was like, are you serious? It was terrible.
Are you going to name and shame?
It was in see, this is the problem. Well, it wasn't actually Dublin. It was Glendalough. It was like a little booth that was attached to the outside of the hotel.
That's like a tourist tax, because they know the tourists are going to pay for it. But that is actually, I'm
scandalous.
I'm shocked. People, bring your pour overs when you're going to Glendalough. Make your coffee at home. Bring the keep cups. That's shocking. But no, it's bad.
I've heard people report back $4.70 for an old flat white. And sometimes these are from like little coffee trucks. I'm like, your rent is not that high, or at least I hope it isn't. You know what I mean? You're not in a full establishment, and they're certainly not providing any heating or toilets. I want to ask you all of your favorites. So if you could kind of give like your favorite breakfast, favorite brunch, lunch, dinner, Sunday lunch. Right. Your favorite breakfast.
Okay. I do really like the fumbly for breakfast. I think because they do really good eggs. They got a nice toast situation. Maybe back in 2015 I did love like an avocado on toast kind of situation, but I like a good filter coffee. Breakfast now. Breakfast. This could be a weekend breakfast, like at 1 p.m. on a Saturday. You know what I mean?
I'm wondering though. So say if you're like got a meeting in town at 10 and you're grabbing something either before or after, that kind of vibe, as opposed to like weekend brunch.
Okay. This is a good question. It would probably, honestly, if I'm being super honest, it would probably be a vegan sausage roll from Centra. Fair. I'm not going to lie.
Gets the job done.
Gets the job done. And I've kind of eschewed them for a long time, you know, the fancy sausage rolls, but I've given them the chance. I don't love sausage. I never really have. But I do like those fancy sausage rolls, the big ones, because you're basically paying almost the same amount for a deli sausage roll as you are these like kind of fancy chunky ones. And I did just recently have one in Carved, which is like a sandwich shop in Dublin, and they do like, so it's like a big one. It's got sesame seeds, the lovely sausage in the middle, and then the relish is tucked into the pastry and around the sausage, so you don't need to do any dipping. It's all on the go. It was delicious, and I know the Pie Man do some very good sausage rolls that they contribute to different cafes.
So then would your weekend brunch then be the fumbly?
Yeah, I think so. I do love, like, there's loads of space, the vibe's really good, they always do good coffee, and I think you can linger there for a bit, get something that's like kind of interesting with your mates. Sometimes get a little glass of wine if you're feeling it, and then you can probably get a little dessert too if you fancy.
I love the fumbly. I used to live very, very, very close to it. And I had, I think, the best arancini of my life there, and one of the best donuts of my life there as well. What about a quick midweek lunch and then like more of a weekend lunch?
Okay. One place that I did used to love going to for a midweek lunch was Fallon and Burn for their soup and sandwich €10 deal. Phenomenal York Deli style sandwiches with so much variety, and they would change their soup every day. So there would always be a veggie one and a veggie one and a meat one. And you could have something from like a lamb tom yum soup to a minestrone to like it wasn't just like, oh, we're gonna do cream and mushroom or something. I love mushrooms, but cream and mushroom makes me want to gag. But yeah, they could have like a cheddar and broccoli soup, and then all these different sandwiches. Their Reuben was my favorite. It was just lovely wheaten bread and like all the stuff that they use in Fallon and Burn that you can't afford to buy in the shop. But it's recently, heartbreaking news has gone up. So that was like, we did a series in Char called Dublin on Tenner, which is where my little catchphrase €10 baby came from, which is my intellectual property. But we did that twice because it was just such a good deal. We were like, we just have to make sure everyone knows about this deal. It's recently gone up to 11 quid. It's no longer €10 baby. So that was a place that I used to go to because it was very central, city centre, good ingredients, but not costing a fortune. Because you go to a lot of places, even outside of Dublin, where a sandwich is like nearly 15 quid. Throw in pig and heifer as well. For a midweek lunch, because their sandwiches are insane, and like you might be waiting maybe 5, I don't think you're ever waiting like 10 minutes, but it's proper Italian deli. They're so sound in there. There's always like 7 people kind of bop around this tiny little space, and their sandwiches are just to die for. So I actually think that they're my number one. They're not city centre, they're kind of like Pierce Street.
And then what about your, let's say, casual dinner with pals and then glam date night or occasion dinner?
Hell yeah. I do love, it's always talked about, Lee's Charming Noodles. I just think it's a fantastic place. I actually love going there by myself. Anytime I've been there has been by myself, and I love to just sit in a little spot and get a nice spicy bowl of something delicious, which it always is. Okay, this has been on my list for a good while, but we're finally going, me and my boyfriend, we're going to Spitalfields in the Liberties. Kind of place that you just forget about sometimes, even though they're just like stalwartly there doing their thing. They don't care if someone's coming in with like a camera to be like, oh, is this one of Dublin 8's best places to eat or whatever. I think it's one of those places, like it's real kind of classic decor. It's not like super modern or hip. But I'm very excited. I know they got the Michelin guide for excellence in service and hospitality either this year or last year. I'm excited to go in and have a lovely sit down meal. And actually, I've met the owner once outside Fallon's pub, and he seems like a good chap.
It's quite unassuming, I would say.
Yes, unassuming is the perfect word.
Yeah. But I have heard it's an institution in a way. Yeah. It's been around for a while. So you mentioned that you were vegan, right?
Yes.
So I was vegan. I was also vegetarian. I was mostly vegetarian for a long period of time, maybe like 4 years or something. And I found people always asked me, why did you stop it? They're always really curious about it. Why did you start eating animal products again? I'm curious to hear why you decided to do that.
It seems like there's a lot of like people who were veggie or vegan or whatever for a long time who have kind of, I hate to say lapsed, because lapsed I feel like makes it sound like you failed or something, and I don't think it's necessarily that. Like I went vegan, when was it, 20? I'd wanted to be veggie since I was very young, but my parents wouldn't let me. I think it was when I was like 14 or something, because like, you know, classic Irish family, it's like, what? Well, you're fucking eating it. So
like, what are you going to eat then?
I think my first act of defiance was maybe sausages when I was like 9 or 10. I was like, I'm not eating these anymore, and pork stuff. I just don't love the taste of pork. So I was able to get away with that, but very little else. And then I developed anorexia when I was like 14, 15. And then from 15 onwards, forced into recovery, which, like, you know, it had to happen because I was literally on my deathbed. And then years of struggling with recovery, and it turned into, after a while, orthorexia, which I don't know if you're aware of it, is obsession with health food and exercise and stuff. So it's this restrictive place, and it just, I think, battled all of that like for about 5 years, and until I turned 20, and I got a better relationship, but I was like, I'm going to go vegan. And now, in fairness, like I do love animals, and it was love for animals, and it did. I think I was vegan up until 2020, maybe. So a good long stint. But it definitely opened me up to like being more enthusiastic about eating, and this joy and discovery that I hadn't felt ever. Because like when I was growing up, I wasn't a fussy eater, but I wasn't like super like adventurous or anything. It's not like I'm going to be like, oh, can I just have plain rice with ketchup? But also I wasn't like going out of my way to try things like courgette. So because I didn't really grow like we didn't grow up with like that many fancy foods in the house either. So it's like eat what you're given, then anorexia, whatever, wouldn't eat anything, and then being very selective, and that was driving my parents mad and whatever. And then yeah, with the veganism, I was like, it did really mean something to me to want to not eat animals. And it's still something, it's something that I don't know if you feel the same, but like since not being vegan, I do kind of struggle with sometimes, especially because I enjoy eating meat now, and fish was always one of my favorites. I was pescatarian for a lot of the time before, like after my eating disorder. I was allowed to be pescatarian, but I wasn't allowed to go veggie because they were like, that's too restrictive and we want to stop you from doing that. Years ago during the pandemic, I'd been thinking about how I missed fish. I feel like I probably shouldn't say this, but I don't feel bad about eating fish the way I feel bad about like eating animals. Like I know that's really bad.
I think a lot of people share that though, because they maybe you don't see a personality from a fish as much as you
Yeah.
might from a pig
Yeah.
or
Unless well, the times I've been out like with friends and I've eaten octopus and they're like, but they're so intelligent, and I'm like, I know, and they're so delicious as well.
yeah.
But it's different when you're the first time I had lamb properly, like post veganism, and I was like, oh gosh, this is very good.
Lamb's a tough one, actually.
Yeah.
I would be quite hesitant to have lamb. I would say I probably only have had lamb maybe five
Mm.
times or something in the last 5 years.
Yeah, like we never had lamb at home because my dad was farmer and he eats meat. My whole family do. Lamb is the one thing that I think wigs him out because he's just like,
Mm.
I can't disassociate or I can't detach from the image of like a sweet little like baby lamb frolicking around the field. And to be honest, neither can I. But yeah, I was like, after a while, I think I've come to realize that I think a lot of my veganism was, while it was helpful and it helped me to move forward on my journey of like going back to a place where food isn't always weaponized against me by my brain.
How is it for you now, as somebody who suffered with anorexia, to be a food writer? That must be quite an interesting
It's
experience.
very ironic, of course, but it's I think it's super prevalent. I was thinking about this today because obviously I knew I'd probably end up talking about this because of this question, but I think it's actually like really common among food writers and people in food, which I didn't realize for ages because when I was growing up and at the time when I was going through the worst and in school, there wasn't really that much. Like now, obviously, there's so many conversations online about eating disorders because they are the biggest. I think they're the biggest killer of all the mental health issues, and nearly got me as well. But I was reading, there's a magazine, another Irish independent food magazine called Scoop, by a woman called Dee Laffin, and I was reading, I think it was the second issue, and there's a fantastic interview with JP McMahon, the chef and restaurateur. And I've known, like, would read his stuff. Like my dad would get the paper every week, and he would always have a column in it. And his story is about his own history or his own experience with an eating disorder. And I was like, fuck, I never knew that. And there's like Ruby Tando as well. She's got that book. What's the book called?
Eat Up or something like
That's
that.
it. That's it.
Yeah.
And I actually just was reading a piece in another food magazine that kind of references that, and the person themselves was talking about, that book and that being very helpful for someone who experienced anorexia as well. But I think there's something in where something has taken joy away from you. Eating disorders are more so a need for control as opposed to actually like wanting to be a certain body size or whatever. Like it's just how it manifests is via food and restriction and or the opposite. But I think there's some subconscious thing within people who've struggled with eating disorders, maybe not always, but I think to reclaim that joy back from something that has been taken from you and something that your brain like actively is trying to always take from you. Like I know you were asking like how I deal with that now as a
Yeah, I think you've answered it in the sense that yeah, it was a control thing, but now you're going, well, I'm going to take control of it and
Yes.
I'm going to use it for something that is positive to me. Your creative passion, your
Hmm.
interests, you're sharing nice meals with friends, etc. It's quite a nice end to the story in a way.
Yeah.
And it's a very positive way to view the relationship now. That something that is, it was so central to your life then in a negative sense, but it's so central to your life now in very much a positive sense.
Yeah. They always say, I think, in circles of like people who are dealing with alcoholism, that to not look at things because they kind of work similarly, like this addiction. It's kind of like an addiction mindset. Um, but they always say like one day at a time. And I do feel that because sometimes when I'm having a day or whatever, you might have to remind yourself every day about why you are choosing to eat and what you're doing. And there's definitely been times where even out filming char videos where I've been like, I actually just like, I feel like there's a block here that I can't get past. And when you can look at it in this small way and making the content and reminding yourself of the meals that you've had and that you've shared and going to these places that you're recommending or doing posts on and being reminded of like the lovely time that you had there, the experience, the different flavors, the craft of the meal that you've enjoyed, the people that you enjoyed it with. I think that's all just such a lovely reinforcement of why we why we eat and why it's important to 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 keep going.
Thank you for sharing your thoughts on that. I appreciate it.
Oh, thank you.
I'm going to ask you the titular question, as you say. What does it mean to be Irish?
I ruminated on this so much since I got the first email, and now I'm like, fuck, have I remembered it? Because I think at this current time in the world and in Ireland specifically, there is a lot of people who are gatekeeping Irish identity in the name of like racist agendas. And it pisses me off something fierce because while there are certain things that make a person Irish, like obviously your place of birth or your genealogy or
Oh
whatever,
yeah,
you know, your
like
that
ancestry.
ancestry, that's a great term. There is obviously that, but I think to boil down identity, which is already such a massive, such cavernous kind of question and so personal to each person, and there's just so many avenues within everyone and who they are and who they think they are and how people perceive them, that like I don't think it's up to anyone to be able to say like, well, you're not Irish because it's like, fuck off. Because I think Irishness, and having listened to other people on this podcast answering this question, I just find it so interesting and so lovely to hear people actually talking about what makes someone Irish or whatever. Because it's like, I think a country doesn't make its people, a people makes its country. And I think that's so true. Like, as I was talking to a woman yesterday who I met when I was walking my dog, to be what is it to be Irish is complaining about the weather. That's like non-negotiable up there. And there's obviously crack. You gotta have a bit of crack. Not everyone. There are a lot of crackless Irish people out there. It's like you get a little like a little glint in your eye, a little divilment. I even see it in people who have moved here from other countries. You see it there. But I think there's a sense of community and togetherness that I just think outside of all of the negativity and the racism and the xenophobia and I don't know, insular mindedness that we're seeing that maybe has always existed. I just think that there, to be Irish is to be warm, is to be friendly, is to be a good laugh, and is to look after one another. There's a resilience in there too. And I think maybe that's why so many people are finding their home here now from other places, is because they resonate with that kindness, that kind of warmth, and you're seeing it in how they interact with Irish culture and become, as you can see when people move here from other places and you watch them, just like you just see the Irishness seep into them, and it's so beautiful. And I hope that isn't too like hugging the world, peace and love, but I think it goes beyond that. That I don't know, that what is it? Oscuelga anam?
The
Anam is the
soul, yeah,
soul.
Anam,
Yeah, I
yeah.
think there's just like it is something to do with your soul.
That's an absolutely beautiful answer. I love You said divilment as well. I've had one person say divilment. I love that word so much.
It's just
like,
you could probably power every street lamp and every house with the divilment
literally.
that does be floating around.
Sian, it has just been such a pleasure to speak to you. Thank you so much, Gurv Mila Mila Mahagut. I've got 20 million more questions to ask you, but I would love to pick your brain maybe again another time.
Well,
It's
listen,
been
I'll see you when
absolute
you're in
pleasure.
Dublin.
We'll go for a 450 Americano.
Hell yeah. We may as well just go for a pint at that point.
Yeah, we actually should at this rate. All right, Gurv Mila, Sian, Slán.
Slán.
Thanks a million for tuning in to How to Be Irish. Remember, if you're not following or subscribing to the podcast yet, please do. And also, please consider supporting my work in the best way that you can possibly. That is by donating a price of a coffee to me. So you can do that by searching How to Be Irish on Patreon. Right, that's it. I'll chat to you next week.